Before we begin tonight's story, let me offer you just one question. What happens when a simple moment, a single misunderstanding, begins to unravel truths no one expected? In a quiet school inside an ordinary classroom, one little girl wrote a sentence about her father, a sentence so honest, so pure, yet it shook an entire community, not because it was unbelievable, but because no one dared to ask whether it might actually be true. This is a story about a father, a daughter, and the power of one voice that refused to be silenced. A story that starts small, almost invisible, until everything begins to change. If you're ready, settle in, take a breath, and let the story unfold. The sound came first, sharp, violent, unmistakable. Rip. Rip. Even without seeing anything, anyone in that classroom could feel the air change. Conversations died mid-sentence. A pencil slipped from someone's hand and clattered softly against the linoleum floor. A chair leg scraped backward as a kid instinctively recoiled. And then came the cold, clipped voice of Miss Parker, steady, polished, confident in a way that made every word cut deeper. "We don't lie in this classroom, Mia. Janitors don't design billion-dollar security systems." For a moment, the silence became so thick that it hummed. The only movement was the soft flutter of torn paper drifting downward, shredded pieces of a child's dream, falling like pale snow at Mia Cole's feet. Mia stood there, frozen, her breath trembling just loud enough for those closest to hear. Her eyes burned, but not with rebellion, more with the confusion of a 10-year-old trying to understand why her truth was being treated like a joke. Her small hands, still ink-stained from writing that very essay the night before, curled weakly at her sides. Her voice didn't come. She was afraid it might crack if she tried. A few kids snickered quiet, uncomfortable laughs from children who didn't really know why they were laughing, only that the teacher's tone gave them permission. A few others looked down, guilt creeping up their faces, but none of them stepped in. None of them dared. Mia's essay had been simple, honest, full of the soft admiration only a child could write with "My dad designed security systems that protect millions. He works as a janitor now so he can pick me up every afternoon. He says the world can be safer if someone brave enough cares." And now that truth lay shredded on the floor. Just outside the classroom, a slow, rhythmic sound came to an abrupt stop thunk. The wooden handle of a mop knocking softly against the hallway wall. Evan Cole, in his faded custodial uniform, had paused mid-step. His heart tightened not because of the silence, but because he recognized the small, fragile tremor in his daughter's breathing. He hadn't meant to overhear. He had only been doing his shift, fixing the loose towel dispenser, replacing soap cartridges, sweeping the older wing of classrooms. But once the first sentence reached him, he went still, listening with the aching instinct of a father who knew exactly how hard the world could be on a child who dared to tell the truth. Miss Parker's voice floated through the open door, cool as stone. Stories are meant to inspire Mia. But this is exaggeration. Your father is a janitor, and that's nothing to be ashamed of, unless you make up things to hide it. A few kids murmured. One whispered louder than he realized. Why would she lie about something like that? Mia swallowed. Hard. "I didn't lie. Miss Parker," she whispered, barely audible. "My dad really did design." The teacher cut her off with the practiced smoothness of someone who believed they were doing the right thing. "That's enough. We tell the truth in this room, young lady. We tell the truth even when it's inconvenient." The irony stung Evan more than he expected. His breath shook once, then steadied as he leaned back into the wall, unseen. He could feel shame burning hot in his chest. Shame not for being a janitor, but because his past, his choices had somehow become ammunition aimed at his daughter. He heard a chair slide. Maybe Mia had taken a step back. Maybe she was shrinking into herself again like she sometimes did when the world demanded explanations she was too young to give. His jaw tightened. He pressed his fingertips to his forehead. It was happening again. The same old fear that the truth he'd tried so hard to bury was still reaching out to hurt the one person he'd sworn to protect. A part of him wanted to walk in right, then stand beside her, say everything she didn't know how to say. But another part, the part that had lived through layoffs, ethics fights, corporate war rooms, and a tragedy he still couldn't forgive himself for, knew stepping into that doorway would only feed Ms. Parker's bias, a janitor defending a fantasy, a girl being coached to embellish. No, he couldn't make it worse for her. He stepped back, letting the hallway's empty hum settle around him. But his heart, it refused to settle. It felt like a fist squeezing tighter and tighter with every breath he took. Inside the classroom, Ms. Parker collected the rest of the essays with a crisp shuffle of papers. Class dismissed. Everyone moved to your next period. Feet shuffled, backpacks zipped. The air filled with the chaotic dissonance of children moving on except for one small figure who remained still a moment too long. Mia knelt quietly, gathering the torn pieces of her essay with trembling hands. A classmate walked by and muttered, "Sorry, Mia," so softly that he probably hoped she wouldn't hear it. Evan's vision blurred for a second, not with tears, but with the weight of everything unsaid. He stayed hidden in the hallway, each breath resonating loudly in his ears. Then, brrrr. The class bell rang with a piercing metallic clang that cut right through him, and in that sharp, echoing moment something inside Evan finally cracked open. He didn't step into the doorway. He didn't call her name. He simply closed his eyes as his thoughts whispered through him, with the heaviness of an old wound reopened. Maybe I was wrong to think I could hide from my past. Maybe I was wrong to think that disappearing would keep her safe, because today, it didn't protect her at all. The hallway stretched out before him, empty, humming, unforgiving. And Evan Cole, once a man who designed systems meant to protect millions, now wondered if he had any idea how to protect the one person who mattered most. As the bell's echo faded, Evan's internal voice whispered clearer, heavier, almost like a confession. Maybe I was wrong to think I could outrun the past and still shield my daughter from it. The morning light didn't pour into the small apartment. It slipped in quietly, thin, gentle, almost hesitant, touching the edges of worn kitchen tiles and settling on the cluttered counter where yesterday's mail still sat unopened. The apartment was old, yes, but lived in, softened by years of shared routines and quiet resilience. Before the sun could fully claim the room, another sound filled the space, soft, steady, comforting. Whisk, whisk, whisk. Eggs beating inside a scratched metal bowl, followed by the faint hiss of a skillet warming on the stove. This was the sound Mia woke to every day, the sound of home. Evan cracked the eggs with the ease of a man who had made this breakfast hundreds of times, not out of habit, but out of devotion. The radio on the counter hummed faintly, its speaker slightly blown, giving the morning news a low, grainy buzz. Somewhere beneath all that, the kettle began its slow build toward a whistle. Behind him, Mia sat at the small wooden table, her backpack leaning against her legs, her hair still messy from sleep. In front of her lay the familiar blue notebook, the one she guarded like treasure. She ran her fingers along the creased edges, tracing the dents and marks from years of use. Inside, pages were filled with interconnected lines, nodes, arrows, annotations written in both careful adult handwriting and the eager scrawl of a child learning to think like an engineer. This notebook wasn't just paper and ink, it was a world. A shared world. The Dream City, as the two of them called it. A city where nobody got left behind. Evan slid a plate toward her, the skillet still whispering heat. "Scrambled or folded?" he asked. "Scrambled," she murmured, flipping open the blue cover. He watched her for a moment, his hands resting lightly on the counter. She looked small, but full of light. Even after yesterday. Even after Miss Parker. He inhaled slowly, the faint scent of toasted bread filling his chest. She shouldn't have had to defend me, he thought. She shouldn't have to carry pieces of my past she barely understands. But then her pencil started tapping, light, rhythmic, excited. "Dad," she said, "I think I finally figured out the blind corner you told me about. The one at the hospital entrances." He turned, eyebrows lifting in surprise. "Oh yeah, let's see." Mia spun the notebook around. On the page was a cluster of lines, crooked, imperfect, but brimming with imagination. Her voice quickened as she explained, "If people crowd all at once, the scanners can't register every ID badge. You said it could glitch because the angle's wrong here." She tapped a corner she'd circled 3 times. "So I made the checkpoint curve instead of staying straight." Evan's chest tightened, not with pain, but with something warm, almost aching. "Yeah," he whispered, "that's actually smart. Really smart." Her face lit up soft and bright like dawn taking its first breath. And for a moment, everything felt simple. But the past had a way of slipping back in even through the faint crackle of the old radio. A memory surfaced without warning, a boardroom made of glass. A dozen executives stiff in their chairs. Alexandra Hayes at the head of the table, her sharp voice cutting through the tension. "You're asking us to delay release by 6 months for a hypothetical risk." Evan answering too truthfully, for a risk that affects the weakest users first, the ones who can't afford a mistake. He remembered the silence afterward, the tight jaws, the glances, and the unspoken message. Idealism doesn't sell products. Another memory flashed, a hospital hallway flooded with noise and confusion after a data breach. He had stood helplessly at the nurse's station hearing his wife's medical information had been leaked online. A leak through a system he had built. A flaw he had warned about. Guilt had buried him for years. But now, watching Mia draw the curved line with such determination, he felt something unexpected, a quiet flicker of pride pushing against the old shadows. "Dad," she said, pulling him out of the memory. Can I write about this in my essay? About what you used to do?" He hesitated. His hand hovered over the kettle before finally turning off the heat. Her eyes lifted to him so open, so trusting it made his throat tighten. "You sure you want to?" he asked softly. "It's your assignment. You can write about anything. Your favorite book, your favorite day." "But I want to write about you," she said simply. "About how you protect people, and how you always say the weakest deserve safety first." Her voice carried no embarrassment, no hesitation, only admiration. Evan exhaled slowly. He wanted to say no, to protect her from exactly what had happened yesterday, but that meant teaching her to hide the truth, to be smaller than who she was, and he couldn't do that. So he forced a small smile. "Okay, kiddo," he said. "Write what's true. I'll deal with the rest." Mia grinned, zipped up her backpack, and carefully slipped the blue notebook inside like she was placing a crown into a velvet case. She ran to the door shoes, scuffing lightly on the floor. "Come on, Dad. We're going to be late." Evan grabbed his jacket, sliding the worn badge holder into his pocket out of habit. The faded Hayes Dynamics logo glinted faintly through the plastic. He paused, thumb brushing the corner of the badge. A symbol of a life he had left behind. A symbol Mia believed in more than he did. If they don't believe her, if they laugh again. His heart squeezed. But when Mia turned back to look at him with those bright, trusting eyes, he found himself standing straighter. "You ready?" he asked. "Ready," she nodded. She pulled the door open. A breeze slipped inside, carrying the faint smell of morning rain and old apartment hallways. As she stepped out, Evan murmured under his breath, too soft for her to hear. "What if they don't believe you this time, kiddo? And what if I can't protect you?" But he followed her anyway, the weight of his past resting quietly in his pocket. As Mia skipped down the stairs, clutching the blue notebook like a shield, Evan hesitated at the landing, squeezing the old Hayes badge until the plastic creaked. He had promised to handle the rest. But what if the truth was the one thing he could no longer outrun? The school morning began the way most did, buzzing hallways, lockers slamming shut, sneakers squeaking against polished floors, but for Mia, everything sounded sharper. Louder, almost as if the world was leaning in waiting to see what she would do after yesterday. Inside room 12B, the chatter rose and fell like waves, chairs, scraping notebooks, flipping the soft thud of backpacks hitting the ground. Someone tested a mechanical pencil, clicking it over and over until another kid hissed at them to stop. The overhead speaker crackled to life with its usual morning announcement, Principal Sanchez's voice warm but slightly distorted. "Good morning, Eagles. Tech and Future Day is coming up next Friday. Stay tuned. This year's guest is someone very special from Hayes Dynamics." A ripple went through the class. Hayes Dynamics was a big name, even to 10-year-olds. But Mia sat quietly at her desk, hands folded over her blue notebook like she was protecting a fragile secret. She could feel the weight of yesterday lingering in the air, the way some students kept glancing at her just long enough for her to notice, but not long enough to look guilty. Ms. Parker entered with her usual brisk steps, heels tapping rhythmically on the tile. Tap, tap, tap. A sound that always made Mia sit a little straighter. "Good morning, class," the teacher said, her voice bright but controlled. "Please take out your drafts for your personal essays." Papers rustled, zippers opened. A few kids whispered to each other before going silent when Ms. Parker shot them a look. She moved through the aisles, offering warm praise to some students. "Oh, wonderful job. Tyler, your father's work with Senator Reed sounds fascinating. And Olivia, your essay about your mom managing 3 restaurants is impressive." But when she stopped near a boy whose mother worked as a waitress, her tone shifted barely, but enough. "That's nice," she said, then quickly turned away as if there wasn't much more worth discussing. Mia noticed it. Not because she wanted to, but because once you saw the pattern, it was impossible to unsee. Her own heart flickered with uncertainty. If the truth wasn't enough yesterday, what made today any different? Still, she straightened in her seat. She believed in her father, and her truth deserved to be written. Miss Parker approached her desk. The room seemed to quiet all at once. Mia, the teacher, said, voice neutral, "Do you have your draft?" "Yes, ma'am." She handed it over, careful not to smear the graphite mark she'd worked so hard on. The essay was shorter than last night's original because she'd had to rewrite the entire thing from memory after hers had been torn apart. But she had written it again anyway. Not out of defiance, but out of loyalty and hope. Ms. Parker flipped through the pages with practiced efficiency. Mia watched her eyes tighten just a fraction when she reached the section about her father designing early prototypes for the Hayes Shield security system. A whisper drifted from behind her. "She's doing it again." She'll hear you." The teacher's tone shifted, cooling at the edges. "Mia, we've discussed this." Mia swallowed. "It's the truth." A few kids stiffened. A few looked away. One boy, Jamal, who had once been wrongly accused by Ms. Parker of cheating on a math test, even though he hadn't sat up straighter as if he sensed what was coming. Before Ms. Parker could respond, the classroom door opened and another teacher poked her head in. "Parker, quick reminder, career and tech prep meeting in the office right after class." "Yes, thank you," she replied, then closed the door again. The interruption didn't soften her expression. She took a slow breath, the kind adults take when they're convinced they're about to correct a child for their own good. "Mia," she said gently, but with that same patronizing undertone, "dreams are wonderful. But exaggeration doesn't help you. You must learn to separate admiration from reality." Every word felt like a rubber band snapping against skin. Mia's pulse thudded in her ears. "I didn't exaggerate," she whispered. "My dad really worked." "We're not reopening this discussion," Miss Parker cut in. The teacher moved on, but her eyes had caught something, just barely a flash of blue sticking out from Mia's backpack pocket. The blue notebook. The notebook that held the sketches her father had taught her to draw. The notebook that held truths more real than any praise Miss Parker had given this morning. During break time, Mia let her friend Lily peek at the newest draft. Whoa, Lily whispered. "Your dad really did all this?" "Yeah," Mia said softly, though she could hear doubt creeping into her own voice. "He did." "It's kinda weird," another kid said, leaning over. "Why would a guy that smart be a janitor now?" Mia felt that sting again, not from the question, but because she didn't know how to answer it any better than her dad did. The bell rang, signaling the end of the period. As the class packed up, Mia slid her essay into her folder just as Miss Parker approached her desk again. Without asking, the teacher picked up the essay once more. Her gaze lingered on the words, "Hayes Shield Security System." A slow, skeptical frown crossed her face. She whispered something under her breath. Something Mia didn't quite catch, but the feeling behind it chilled her. As the classroom emptied, Miss Parker held the essay a moment longer, her fingers tightening around the page. "Hayes Shield," she murmured, voice low and disbelieving. "No, absolutely not." Her eyes narrowed slightly. She was convinced Mia was lying, and now she intended to prove it. As the last student left the room, Miss Parker stood over Mia's desk, gripping the essay, her gaze locked on those two words in bold pencil, "Hayes Shield Security System." Her voice dropped to a cold whisper. "Not a chance." And with that, she reached toward Mia's backpack. The city pulsed long before sunrise, humming HVAC vents, distant traffic rolling like a low tide, and the faint electronic chirps of skyscraper security systems booting up for the day. Downtown stood polished and alive, all steel bones and glass skin reflecting a world that demanded sharpness, speed, perfection. Hayes Dynamics towered above most of it. Inside, the elevator glided upward with a soft hydraulic sigh, carrying Alexandra Hayes toward another morning that looked on paper like success yet felt in her bones like consequence. She stood still, hands clasped lightly in front of her, listening to the muted hum beneath the elevator music. That hum was familiar, predictable. Machines, unlike people, didn't lie. She trusted that. When the elevator opened onto the executive floor, a wave of sound followed keyboards tapping, phones vibrating against glass tables, muffled conversations behind sleek conference doors. Her heels clicked evenly across the marble, a rhythm her staff recognized instantly. Conversations lowered. Doors opened a little faster. Assistants straightened in their seats. "Good morning, Miss Hayes," one greeted. Alexandra nodded, but her mind was already 3 steps ahead. The previous night's security report still weighed on her anomalies. She didn't like inconsistencies her team couldn't yet explain. And she hated loose ends. Inside the boardroom, she scanned the room with the calm intensity that had built an empire. The lights overhead buzzed gently. Someone's pen tapped nervously until they realized she'd noticed. "Let's begin," she said, sliding into her chair. A presentation flickered to life. Graphs, charts, numbers, predictions, and trust issues. "We've completed preliminary integration tests with the new partner," her head of data security explained. "But they're encryption logs. They don't align with the projections." Alexandra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "So they sent us doctored data." A few executives shifted uncomfortably. "Well, we can't confirm that," yet someone ventured. But Alexandra cut in, voice steady, deliberate. "When numbers don't add up, someone is lying. And I don't invest in liars." Her tone wasn't angry. It didn't need to be. It carried the weight of experience, painful, unforgettable experience. A ripple of tension ran through the room. Nobody challenged her. Nobody dared. As the meeting wrapped, her assistant, Mara, approached. "Your schedule today includes the charity outreach visit, the public school on the east side. You're giving a brief talk for their Tech and Future Day. It's part of the community initiative, your PR team." "I remember," Alexandra said softly. "What time?" 11:15. "We should leave around 10:30. Alexandra gave a crisp nod, though something flickered behind her eyes. Not annoyance, not dread, but a cool distance. She didn't dislike children or charity. She simply didn't believe in glossy stories for effect. Inspiration was a currency often used by people who didn't mean it, but she would go, because responsibility demanded it. Mara hesitated, then added, "Security flagged another issue in the SHIELD system logs. Something about a structural blind spot that traces back to the earliest version of the prototype. They say no one on the current team understands why it exists." Alexandra paused mid-step. Her heartbeat gave one slow, deliberate thud. A blind spot. In the earliest iteration. Her mind pulled up a memory she hadn't touched in years. A younger engineer, stubborn and brilliant. An argument about protecting the most vulnerable users first. A heated meeting where he challenged half the board and her. Evan Cole. She hadn't spoken his name in so long that it sounded strange, even in her own thoughts. "He left," she murmured almost to herself. "He walked away from everything." "Yes," Mara said carefully, "but the flaw traces back to discussions he once had with you. At least, according to the archived notes." Alexandra closed her eyes briefly, not because of the flaw, but because of the reminder. Trusting people had nearly destroyed her once. Losing trust again, losing control, would be worse. Focus, she told herself. The problem was technical-logical containable. "We'll address it later," she said firmly. "Let's stay on schedule." Later that morning, inside the company car headed for the school, Alexandra reviewed the security report on her tablet. Her eyes scanned the highlighted section Inconsistent User Flow under High Volume Cluster Events, potential blind corner affecting badge authentication. The exact kind of failure Evan had predicted years ago. His voice, firm yet earnest, resurfaced. "If you don't prioritize the weakest users, the whole system is weaker. You're optimizing for the wrong end of the scale." Back then, she'd thought he was idealistic. Maybe naive. Too emotional for a field that demanded logic. But the numbers in front of her, they didn't lie. She closed the file. Outside the car window, the scenery shifted, sleek buildings giving way to small shops, worn sidewalks, the kind of neighborhood she hadn't visited in years. Kids walked in groups, backpacks bouncing laughter echoing faintly across crosswalks. 2 minutes out, the driver announced. Alexandra exhaled long and steady. She didn't know that her past was sitting inside this very school. She didn't know that a child had written his name in pencil the night before. She didn't know that her entire afternoon would tilt on something as small as a blue notebook. But something inside her tightened as they pulled in a quiet signal from a gut that rarely misled her. When she stepped out, the school entrance buzzed with noise footsteps, chatter a PA announcement that crackled overhead. A staff member approached quickly, breathy with excitement. "Ms. Hayes, thank you for coming. Everyone's so thrilled." Alexandra smiled politely, but her mind was already tuning into the sounds around her students. Laughing sneakers squeaking the deep echo of a basketball bouncing somewhere in the gym. And beneath all that, a tug she couldn't name. A whisper from a past she thought she'd locked in a boardroom drawer long ago. She followed the staff member into the building. Each tap of her heels echoed off the hallway like a countdown. Then, as she turned toward room 12B, something in her chest clicked sharply like recognition arriving before reason. This is where it begins, she realized. This is where everything tangled will start to unravel. As she stepped through the classroom doorway, Alexandra paused mid-breath, her eyes catching on a flash of blue in a child's hands. A notebook, old, worn, filled with diagrams she hadn't seen in a decade. And for the first time in years, Alexandra Hayes felt her pulse skip. The classroom buzzed with the cheerful, chaotic noise of career and tech day voices overlapping chairs, shifting a dozen eager hands waving each time a parent finished speaking. The air felt alive with curiosity and the faint scent of cafeteria muffins drifting in from the hallway. Parents from every corner of the community had come, a delivery driver explaining logistics, a server from a neighborhood restaurant talking about teamwork, an office manager sharing stories about spreadsheets and stubborn printers. Most of them were nervous. A few were proud. All of them were honest. and then the room shifted. It didn't happen loudly. It happened the way the air changes before a storm, the quiet intake of breath, the stillness spreading from desk to desk, the almost reverent hush that rippled across the room when the classroom door opened. Alexandra Hayes stepped inside. Her heels clicked softly on the floor, but the weight of her presence filled the space long before she spoke. Students leaned forward. A few whispered her name. Someone gasped. Even Miss Parker straightened her posture, smoothing her blouse with the quick, nervous gesture of someone eager to impress. "Class," Miss Parker announced with practiced sweetness, "we are honored to welcome Ms. Alexandra Hayes, CEO of Hayes Dynamics." Applause erupted, light, awkward, childlike, but full of wonder. Alexandra offered a polite smile, nodding once. The noise settled, but Mia didn't clap. She sat very still, hands resting protectively over the opening of her backpack where the corner of her blue notebook peeked out like a secret, waiting to be discovered. Ms. Parker seized the moment. "Ms. Hayes," she began, stepping closer. "I was just sharing with our guests how important it is for students to learn the difference between aspiration and truth." The emphasis on the last word was pointed too pointed. Several kids glanced nervously at Mia. She stared down at her desk. "Oh," Alexandra replied mildly. "And how do you teach that distinction?" "With examples," Miss Parker said smoothly. "Children often embellish, especially when they admire someone. But it's our duty to guide them back to reality." She spoke as if rehearsing for an audience of donors, as if what she was about to say would earn her praise. "For instance," she continued, "one of our students, sweet girl, lovely student, recently wrote something imaginative about her father. A janitor claiming he designed high-level security systems. A few parents shifted uncomfortably. A few students stared at the floor. Mia felt her cheeks burn. Alexandra didn't blink, but her attention sharpened. "Oh," she asked quietly. "Which student?" Mia Cole. Ms. Parker answered, gesturing toward her. "She's clearly bright, but sometimes bright children blur the line between admiration and fact." The room felt suddenly tighter. Mia instinctively pulled her backpack closer to her chest, but Miss Parker was already moving. "Let me show you," she said lightly, as if she were doing something harmless. She tugged open the backpack without asking and pulled out the blue notebook. Mia gasped softly, fingers trembling. "Oh dear, Miss Parker," said, feigning surprise. "This is full of diagrams. Little drawings she made claiming they're her father's designs." Alexandra stepped closer, extending a hand. "May I see that?" The teacher placed the notebook in her palm with a satisfied smile, certain that the CEO would affirm her judgment that all of this was just childish fantasy. But the moment Alexandra opened it, the satisfaction on Miss Parker's face began to crack. Inside were pages worn with use pencil smudges, imperfect lines, connecting nodes, clusters of arrows, equations written in a child's handwriting but clearly guided by an adult who knew exactly what those numbers meant. The room fell silent as Alexandra flipped through the pages. And then she stopped. On page 14. The diagram. A system layout messy, incomplete, but unmistakably familiar. Her breath caught, not visibly, but enough that she felt it tighten in her throat. This was the earliest architecture sketch of the Hayes Shield prototype, a sketch only a handful of people had ever seen, a sketch discussed only once behind closed doors in a heated meeting. The words scribbled beside it made her hand tremble just barely. "Dad says good security protects the weakest first." A sentence she had not heard in over a decade. A sentence only one man had ever said to her. Mia Alexandra said softly, fingers tightening on the page. "Who taught you to draw this?" Mia lifted her chin, trying not to shake. "My dad," she whispered. "He said he worked at your company a long time ago. He taught me what he remembered." The class watched as Alexandra's expression shifted. Not disbelief, not anger, but something far more complicated. Recognition, confusion, and something like Memory. You. Wrote that he said this? Alexandra asked, pointing at the note. Mia nodded. He said it all the time. That you have to protect the people who don't have power. That's what security is for. A silence stretched in the air, long, heavy electric. Alexandra closed the notebook gently as though it were fragile. Behind her composed exterior, her mind raced. Impossible. It can't be him. After all these years, why would he be here? Why would he disappear like that? Miss Parker stepped in, mistaking Alexandra's stunned quiet for agreement. As you can see, she said with an air of triumph, children often create stories. To Alexandra raised a hand sharply. The room froze. Her voice was low-controlled but edged with unmistakable authority. Where is Mia's father now? Miss Parker blinked. Well, he works here, as a janitor. I assume he's somewhere on the premises. The words struck Alexandra harder than she expected. The air around her seemed to shift. She turned back to Mia, voice shifting from cool precision to something raw. Mia, what's your father's name? The little girl swallowed. Evan, she whispered. Evan Cole. The name landed like a stone dropped into a deep well. Echoing, sinking, unavoidable. Alexandra closed her eyes for a single heartbeat, the weight of a forgotten past pressing into her ribs. When she opened them again, her voice was barely a breath. It can't be him. But every instinct she had, every memory told her it was. The hum of an old fluorescent light buzzed softly above Evan's head as he tightened a loose screw on the flickering ceiling fixture. The hallway was mostly empty except for the distant clang of locker doors and the faint chatter drifting from classrooms. He could feel the building settling around him in quiet, familiar rhythms, the groan of the old pipes behind the wall, the soft drip of a leaky faucet he was planning to fix next. He lived in these sounds. They were simple, predictable. A far cry from the alarms and alerts that once rang through high-tech control rooms. He stepped down from the ladder landing with a soft thud. The scent of industrial cleaner lingered faintly in the air, sharp, sterile grounding. He took a moment to steady himself before picking up his mop and bucket and moving toward the restroom where the sink had been dripping since last week. He didn't go near Mia's classroom during important hours. He never wanted to be the shadow in the doorway, the reminder to his daughter that her father didn't belong among the briefcases, the suits, the fancy careers other parents carried like badges of honor. If staying unseen protects her, then that's where I belong, he told himself. But even as he thought it, a knot tightened in his chest. He was starting to wonder if hiding actually protected anything at all. He crouched by the sink, tightening the valve beneath the basin. The drip slowed, then stopped. For a few quiet seconds, the only sound was his breath and the soft echo of water settling in the pipes. Then a memory crept in, uninvited, unsoftened. A glass-walled conference room. The cold hum of servers behind the wall. The glow of a massive touchscreen filled with security diagnostics. Evan, we need market readiness, not philosophical debates, an executive had snapped. Your concerns slow us down, another argued. You're overreacting. And Alexandra Hayes, brilliant, relentless, standing at the head of the room, eyes sharp as cut steel. You're prioritizing scenarios that hurt our rollout, she'd said. You're assuming the worst because you're afraid something will go wrong. He had looked at her then, direct, tense, stubborn. I'm assuming the worst because I've seen the worst, he whispered back. People who can't afford to be forgotten are exactly the ones our work should protect first. No one sided with him. They had moved ahead without fixing the flaw he kept warning them about. And, months later, that flaw had contributed to the breach that revealed patient data, including his wife's, the breach that turned a hospital room into chaos, confusion, and fear. He had never forgiven himself. So he walked away, from the industry, from the title, from the life that had once seemed so certain. Choosing anonymity felt like penance. He didn't notice he'd gone still in the hallway, hands gripping the edge of the sink until a voice echoed from the intercom. "Mr. Cole, please report to the principal's office." His chest tightened. The principal's office, during school hours. That only meant one thing. Mia. He wiped his hands on a rag, trying to keep his heartbeat steady as he walked down the hallway. The closer he got to the office, the louder the ticking of the wall clock became, like a countdown he couldn't slow. He reached the door and paused. Voices drifted from inside, two women, one measured and composed, the other brittle and defensive. He recognized one instantly, Alexandra Hayes. He froze. The old instinct run before the past catches up flared inside him like a warning. But then he heard another voice. "Ms. Parker." And something in her tone put a cold knot in his stomach. He pushed the door open. Inside, Principal Sanchez sat behind her desk, face tight with concern. "Ms." Parker stood stiffly beside her, arms crossed defensively. And near the window, poised and still as a blade, stood Alexandra Hayes, backlit by daylight, the blue notebook clutched in her hand. It was the first time she had seen him in years, yet nothing in her expression suggested surprise. She simply looked at him as if the universe had just confirmed a suspicion she didn't want to have. "Mr. Cole," the principal began carefully, "please come in." Evan stepped inside. His pulse pounded in his ears. The door clicked shut behind him with a soft finality. Alexandra turned fully toward him. There was no anger in her face, but there was something else, something sharper. Recognition mixed with unfinished conversations and unhealed wounds. "It's really you," she said quietly. Evan swallowed, unable to look away. "Alexandra," he said, voice steady but low. "You're here." Miss Parker jumped in, her tone defensive. "I believe this is all one big misunderstanding. Mia wrote something untrue, and I simply untrue." Alexandra cut in, holding up the blue notebook. "Because this drawing comes directly from an early prototype I saw only once, in a private meeting, a meeting that included exactly one other person in this room." She looked at Evan. His eyes dropped to the notebook in her hand, Mia's handwriting mixed with his old sketches. Echoes of a life he'd tried to bury. Principal Sanchez cleared her throat gently. "Mr. Cole, perhaps you can help us understand." He felt his breath catch. His past, his daughter, his choices, everything colliding in one suffocating moment. Before he could speak, he heard it, the soft shuffle of sneakers outside the office door. A small shadow lingered beneath the frosted glass window. Mia. She had followed him, and she had heard Alexandra say his name, his real name, his old name, one he never used in front of her. Who was Dad? Really? The question wasn't spoken aloud, but he felt it, like a weight pressed into his ribs. Alexandra exhaled slowly. "Evan, we need to talk." Her words hung in the air like a drawn breath, tentative, unavoidable, on the edge of something neither of them had prepared for. Outside the door, Mia's soft gasp broke the silence. She had heard everything. Evan turned sharply, eyes wide, just as her shadow slipped away from the glass. He whispered more to himself than anyone. She wasn't supposed to find out like this. The office felt too small for the four people inside it, as if the walls had quietly inched closer when the truth entered the room. A slow, rhythmic ticking came from the clock above the door, each second landing with the weight of something that couldn't be undone. Evan stood just inside, hands still damp from fixing a sink minutes earlier. Alexandra stood across the room, the blue notebook held against her side like a fragile artifact. She was perfectly composed on the outside, but the tension in her jaw, the steady control of her breath betrayed something far more turbulent. Principal Sanchez folded her hands on the desk, sensing the storm brewing between them. "Let's take this one step at a time," she said gently. But Miss Parker spoke first. With all due respect, she began, voice stiff. "I only acted in the best interest of the class." We cannot encourage what Evan asked quietly. There was no anger in his voice, only a tired kind of pain. Falsehoods, Miss Parker replied. Mia was making exaggerated claims and by tearing up her work, Evan's tone sharpened, but he didn't raise his voice. She wrote the truth. Miss Parker exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. She idolizes you. Children confuse admiration with fact all the time. Before Evan could respond, Alexandra stepped forward, placing the notebook on the desk. Her voice sliced through the air, calm but edged with steel. What Mia wrote wasn't a fantasy. Miss Parker blinked. I beg your pardon. Alexandra opened the notebook to the page she had bookmarked the sketch, the blind spot, the handwritten note. This diagram, she said, tapping the page, is an early version of a system only one of my former engineers designed. A version that never left an internal meeting. A version that wasn't documented anywhere official. The room went silent. Evan felt the air tighten the past, closing in like a tide. Alexandra looked directly at Miss Parker. So before you label a child dishonest, perhaps consider the limits of what you know. The teacher's face reddened, her defenses faltering. I didn't realize. No, Alexandra said evenly. You didn't ask. Principal Sanchez cleared her throat, her voice soft but firm. This conversation is no longer about an essay. It's about how we treat our students. Evan shifted uncomfortably under everyone's attention. Look, he said quietly, I didn't want any of this becoming a spectacle. Mia wrote what she believed, what she knows is true. I left Hayes Dynamics a long time ago. My choices back then, they're not something I want her carrying. Mia, who had been listening outside, pushed the door open before anyone could respond. Her eyes were wide, confused, hurt and searching. Dad, she whispered, why didn't you tell me? Her small voice cracked something inside him. He knelt beside her, the old janitor uniform wrinkling at the knees as he faced her honestly. I wasn't hiding who I was, he said softly. I was hiding who I failed to be. Mia frowned. But you told me the truth. You taught me everything in that notebook. Evan swallowed. I taught you the parts I wasn't ashamed of. The air shifted heavy with a decade of unspoken regrets. Alexandra watched him. Really watched him for the first time since he left the boardroom years ago. There was something in her gaze that softened not out of sympathy, but recognition. She stepped closer. Evan, she said quietly, we're dealing with a problem. A big one. The same blind spot you warned us about. It's surfacing again. The team can't explain it. He didn't respond immediately. He looked down at Mia instead, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Your father, Alexandra, continued addressing the principal as much as the room was one of the best system architects we ever had. When he left, we lost something important, more important than we realized. Ms. Parker's voice trembled. I didn't know any of this. I thought that she was lying, Evan asked not unkindly. Or that she shouldn't dream too big because her father wears blue coveralls instead of a suit. Miss Parker flinched, but before the moment could turn cruel, Alexandra stepped in. This isn't about blame, she said. It's about responsibility. Her gaze landed on Evan again, steady and unblinking. If what your daughter says is true, and I believe it is, then the system currently protecting millions has a flaw. Only you can explain. The room seemed to hold its breath. You walked away from the industry, she continued, but the consequences didn't walk away from you. Evan's jaw tightened. He knew that. He'd always known. Mia looked up at him, voice barely above a whisper. Dad, if people are in danger, shouldn't you help? His heart twisted. He had spent years trying to shield her from that world, from his own guilt, from the weight he'd been carrying since the breach. But hearing her say it, it pierced right through the wall he'd built. He glanced at Alexandra, her eyes steady waiting. He glanced at Miss Parker, her defensive posture now replaced with uncertainty, maybe even regret. He glanced at the principal, who simply watched him with quiet expectation. And then he looked at Mia, his whole world in one small frame. He exhaled, long, heavy, like a man standing at the edge of a truth he could no longer avoid. Before he could answer, the school bell rang sharp, sudden, loud enough to make everyone jump. The sound echoed through the office, bouncing off the walls like a question demanding to be answered. Alexandra stepped closer, lowering her voice to a quiet challenge. "Evan, are you really going to stay in this hallway and pretend it's not your problem?" His breath caught. Mia squeezed his hand. The world tilted. Evan didn't respond, not with words. But the look in his eyes said everything. He was standing at a crossroads, and whichever direction he chose, nothing about their lives would remain the same. The school's staff conference room was never meant for moments like this. Usually it hosted mundane things, budget updates, bake sale plans, reminders about early dismissal. Today, however, the air inside felt heavier, almost reluctant, as if the walls themselves understood that something long overdue was finally happening. A soft buzz from the fluorescent lights hummed above the table. Papers rustled. A coffee machine gurgled in the corner. All ordinary sounds, yet layered now with tension strong enough to shift the room's gravity. Miss Parker sat stiffly at one end of the table, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her shoulders were straight, but her chin trembled with an effort to appear composed. Principal Sanchez sat beside her, quiet but alert, trying to maintain neutrality. Across from them, Alexandra Hayes and Evan Cole took their seats. It was the first time Alexandra had sat in a school meeting like this. No glass walls, no tailor-made boardroom chairs, no assistants taking notes. Just the sharp tick-tick-tick of the cheaper wall clock and the unfiltered honesty pressing toward the surface. Alexandra folded her hands, posture straight but calm. "Let's talk about what happened," she said softly. Ms. Parker bristled. "I was doing my job. Children lie, they embellish. I was teaching her a valuable lesson." Evan exhaled slowly. He didn't raise his voice. What lesson was that? That her truth is disposable, that her experiences only matter if they match your expectations. Ms. Parker flinched. "That's not fair." "No," Alexandra said, leaning slightly forward. "What's not fair is the position you put that child in." Her voice was quiet, clear, precise. She wasn't attacking. She was exposing. Miss Parker turned defensive again. "I've been teaching for over 20 years. I know when kids exaggerate. It's my job to prepare them for the real world." "By humiliating them?" Alexandra asked. The teacher looked wounded but proud. "I've always held my students to high standards." Alexandra's expression softened, not forgiving, not approving, but seeing. "I understand standards," she said. "I built a company on them. I know what it means to be strict, to demand excellence, to expect more from people than they do from themselves." Her voice dipped, carrying something deeper, an echo of betrayal of too many broken promises. But there's a difference between challenging someone and robbing them of their voice. Miss Parker swallowed hard but didn't look away. Principal Sanchez gently stepped in. "We're here to learn from this, to understand what biases may be affecting how we respond to our students." The word bias made Miss Parker stiffen. "I'm not biased. I treat all my students the same." Evan spoke before anyone else could challenge that. "No, you don't." She looked at him sharply. "You praised the lawyer's son for mentioning a senator." Evan continued, voice calm. "You dismissed another child's essay because his mother works in a restaurant." Ms. Parker blinked rapidly. "That's not, And you assumed my daughter was lying," Evan said, "because you couldn't imagine someone with my job title having the life she described." Silence pressed into every corner of the room. Miss Parker's eyes glossed. "I was trying to protect her. Children can be cruel. I didn't want her to be mocked for building fantasies." Evan shook his head. She wasn't writing a fantasy. She was writing about her father. That's sacred. Alexandra looked between them, taking in every word. Ms. Parker's voice broke without warning. I didn't realize I was hurting her. I thought I was teaching her to be honest with herself. No, Alexandra said gently. You were teaching her to distrust herself. Tears slipped silently down the teacher's cheeks. She wiped them, quickly embarrassed. Principal Sanchez leaned forward. This is an opportunity not for punishment, but for growth. We need to acknowledge what happened and we need to address it. She slid a printed document toward Ms. Parker. We're implementing a new program training on implicit bias, active listening, and trauma-sensitive teaching. We'd like you to participate and help lead some of the initiatives. Ms. Parker looked stunned. You're not firing me. No, the principal said. You're a good teacher, but even good teachers carry biases. We all do. What matters is whether we're willing to confront them. The room fell quiet again. Then Alexandra spoke, her voice unexpectedly soft. My company is willing to fund a school-wide initiative, Believe First Question with Kindness. She glanced at Evan. If we want to raise a generation of children who feel safe telling the truth, we have to start with how we listen. Mins. Parker's tears returned this time paired with genuine remorse. I didn't see it. I didn't see what I was doing to her. Evan took a quiet breath. You weren't trying to be cruel, he said, his voice filled with tired compassion. But intention doesn't erase impact. Ms. Parker nodded slowly, shame settling into her voice. I want to apologize to Mia. Properly, publicly. You will, the principal assured her. For a moment, no one spoke, and yet the silence wasn't suffocating. It felt like the first deep breath after holding one too long. Finally, Ms. Parker whispered, I thought I was teaching truth, but I wasn't even seeing mine. Her voice trembled. I didn't know why that line in her essay bothered me so much. But now I do. I've dismissed kids before when I didn't think their stories fit what I believed about their families. She wiped at her eyes. I didn't realize how much harm that caused. Alexandra nodded, unexpectedly gentle. Growth looks like that. It starts with discomfort. Evan stared down at the table, then said quietly, Mia will forgive you. She forgives people easily, sometimes too easily. And you, Ms. Parker, whispered. He hesitated, then exhaled. I'm working on it, he said, one step at a time. There was no accusation in his tone, just truth, simple human truth, the kind that settled quietly in the heart. As the meeting ended, Miss Parker lingered in the empty classroom. She knelt beside Mia's desk, reached into the trash bin, and pulled out one torn scrap of paper she had thrown away. She smoothed it gently with trembling fingers. On it, in Mia's handwriting, was one sentence. Dad says we protect the weakest first. Miss Parker pressed a hand to her mouth as her tears fell freely. The auditorium thrummed with an energy the school hadn't felt in years. Folding chairs clinked as volunteers arranged the last few rows. Microphones crackled softly as the sound crew tested them, tap tap, adjusting the volume until the room filled with a warm, steady hum. The air carried that unmistakable scent of school assemblies, paper programs, floor polish, and the faint sweetness of cafeteria cookies meant for the reception afterward. Except today wasn't about cookies. Today was about truth. Parents filtered in, talking with low curiosity. Students whispered excitedly, tugging at sleeves and pointing at the stage where a podium had been set up beside the school's banner. A few reporters from the local paper sat near the front adjusting their cameras. They'd been alerted to the assembly's unexpected significance. No one knew exactly what was coming, but they felt it. Backstage, Mia held Evan's hand so tightly he could feel each tiny tremor. She wore her best dress, not fancy, but special soft fabric, pale blue, matching the shade of her notebook. She kept glancing out at the audience, then back up at her father as if checking he was still there. You okay? Evan asked softly. She nodded, but her breath wavered. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I." She blinked up at him in surprise, but he added gently, "Being scared means we're doing something that matters." Her fingers tightened around his. On stage, Principal Sanchez stepped up to the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on short notice." Her voice was calm, steady, carrying both professionalism and an unspoken apology for the school's recent failings. "We're here today because something important happened. Something that challenged us as educators, as parents, as a community." The room grew still. It would have been easy, she continued, to minimize it, to brush it aside. But we choose transparency, and we choose growth. She stepped back. Then Alexandra Hayes walked onto the stage. The room drew a collective breath. Even without a spotlight, her presence commanded attention. She didn't look like a billionaire today, not polished, not distant, just a woman confronting a part of her past in a place she never expected to find it. "Thank you for having me," she began, her voice resonating through the auditorium. "I'm here because of a story written by a child who refused to let the truth be erased." She paused, eyes briefly sweeping the crowd before settling on a small figure backstage. "Mia," she said softly, "your courage brought us all here." Mia's hand flew instinctively to her chest. Evan squeezed her shoulder gently. Alexandra continued. "When I was growing up, my family didn't have much, and there were people who didn't believe in me. People who couldn't imagine someone like me building a company, designing technology, or being trusted with anything important." She took a breath. "I know how it feels when someone dismisses your truth." A hush rippled across the audience, teachers, shifting parents nodding quietly, children listening with uncommon stillness. "But I'm also here to talk about someone else. Someone who changed the way I think about security, about responsibility, and about protecting people." She turned toward Evan, who stepped onto the stage with Mia beside him. "This, Alexandra said, is the man whose work has protected millions of users, work the world never saw because he chose to walk away when he believed the cost of staying was too great." Murmurs echoed across the room. Evan stood awkwardly, hands clasped, the janitor uniform suddenly too small for the weight of everything being said about him. He cleared his throat, adjusting the microphone lower. I'm not sure I deserve that introduction," he began. Laughter rippled softly, gentle, encouraging. He glanced at Mia before continuing. "I left my old job because I made mistakes that hurt people I loved. I thought stepping away would protect what mattered most." He inhaled. "But my daughter reminded me that hiding the truth doesn't fix anything. It just keeps us small. And small isn't what our kids deserve." Mia took a step closer to him, holding his hand proudly. "I didn't tell Mia not to write her story," he said, "because I didn't want her to ever think her truth wasn't worth telling." A wave of applause rolled through the auditorium, genuine, warm, the kind that wraps around a person like a soft coat. Then it was Ms. Parker's turn. She walked out slowly, as if each step cost her a measure of courage. Her eyes were red, but steady. She stopped at the microphone, breathing deeply before speaking. "I owe this community an apology," she said, voice trembling despite her effort to control it. "I thought I was teaching honesty, but I was only teaching my own limitations. I judged a child based on her father's job title, and that is a mistake I will never make again." The crowd held its breath. "I'm sorry, Mia," she said, turning to the girl with sincerity that radiated through the room. "And I promise you and all my students that I'm learning to see better, to listen better, to believe first." Tears glimmered in Mia's eyes. Another quiet wave of applause rose, some parents nodding deeply, others wiping their cheeks. Moments like this were rare, raw, human. Principal Sanchez returned. "As a part of our commitment to growth, this school will be participating in new programs focused on bias awareness, empathy, and listening. And thanks to Hayes Dynamics, we're launching a new initiative centered on student storytelling and community trust." Mia squeezed Evan's hand hard enough to make him wince. Then Alexandra leaned toward the mic once more. "Before we close, I want to say one last thing," she said, her eyes drifting toward Evan. "No system is perfect. No person is perfect, but integrity means doing the hard thing even when it costs you." Evan Cole walked away from everything because he refused to compromise the safety of the weakest users. And today, he reminded us that truth, especially a child's truth, must never be dismissed. The crowd erupted into a full standing ovation. Mia started crying first, then Evan, then, quietly, Miss Parker. And from backstage a cluster of kids whispered, "That's Mia's dad. He's amazing." She was telling the truth. Evan knelt down to Mia's height. "You okay, kiddo?" he whispered. She nodded through tears. "You're not just my dad," she said softly. "You're you." Something inside him finally loosened. The guilt, the shame, the weight of 10 years of silence. He picked her up just for a moment and held her while the applause washed over them. As the crowd began to settle, Alexandra stepped close to Evan, speaking quietly, so only he could hear Hayes. "Dynamics needs someone who understands people the way you do. I don't just want you back, Evan." She hesitated, breath-catching. "I want you to help me rebuild our system properly this time." Evan stared at her, the auditorium lights casting long shadows around them. And, for the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. Spring came slowly to the east side of the city, soft breezes whisking past chain-link fences, the faint scent of cut grass rising from the schoolyard, and the gentle chorus of children laughing during recess. The school felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the walls themselves held a new kind of warmth. Inside her classroom, Miss Parker pinned a large poster above the whiteboard, smoothing the corners with the care of someone rebuilding something fragile. The poster read, "Believe first. Question with kindness." Below it, colorful drawings from students decorated the wall, family portraits, dreams for the future, small notes about someone they admired. This wasn't just decor, it was a declaration, a new foundation. Meanwhile, in the newly formed STEM club, excitement buzzed like electricity. The school had never had a club like this. They now had a modest but spirited innovation lab equipped with donated tablets, small coding kits, and gently used equipment Hayes Dynamics had pulled from its retired inventory. The space hums with curiosity. Tiny motors whirring keyboards, clacking the delighted squeals of children discovering that they could make a robot move 3 inches to the left. In the center of it all was Mia, confident in a way she'd never been before. Her hair was tied up in a messy ponytail, her eyes alive with ideas. "Dad," she said, tugging at Evan's sleeve. "Watch this." She pressed a button on her small circuit board. A tiny LED blinked in a sequence, 3 short flashes, 2 long. Evan grinned. "That's your safety signal." "Yep." "If something fails in the system, the light changes and it tells the other devices to switch to backup mode." She paused, cheeks warming slightly. "It's kind of like what you used to do." He tousled her hair gently. "You're doing better," he whispered. "Much better." Behind them, a group of parents peeked in, smiling as their children explained circuits and sensors with newfound pride. And, somewhere among the excited chatter, Evan felt something loosen inside him. A weight, once unbearably heavy, was now beginning to melt. A week later, Evan found himself in a very different environment. The 27th floor of Hayes Dynamics. A conference room with glass walls and a view stretching all the way to the waterfront. The gentle hum of air conditioning mixed with the soft tapping of keyboards outside. The space felt both familiar and foreign, a place he once belonged, a place he never thought he'd return to. Alexandra entered with her usual quiet authority, a folder under her arm, and exhaustion behind her eyes that only someone who knew her well could see. "Coffee?" she asked, setting a cup beside him. "I remember you only drink it black," she added. He smiled softly. "You remember too much." "I forget nothing," she replied, sitting across from him. "That's the curse of my job." A brief silence settled, a silence filled not with tension but something delicate, cautious, and human. She slid a tablet toward him. There she said, "That's the blind spot. It's deeper than we thought. The system reroutes around it under normal loads so it never surfaces. But if someone targeted it, they could bypass the entire authentication gateway," Evan finished quietly. Alexandra nodded. "And our team still doesn't understand why the flaw exists." He studied the diagram memories flooding him late nights, sketching prototypes, arguing over ethics, drafting code meant to protect people, not profit. "It's because the system was built backward," he said finally. "It protects high-value users first." Alexandra looked at him, eyes darkening with realization. "You warned us," she murmured. "And you warned me," he countered gently, "that I was letting fear drive my work." He wasn't accusing. He was remembering. She inhaled. "We were both right, and both wrong." Something softened between them, then an invisible thread reconnecting after years of strain. They spent the next hour mapping solutions, debating approaches, challenging each other the way they used to. But this time, something was different. No egos, no corporate pressure looming overhead. Just two minds with the same goal. And, beneath it all, something warmer, unspoken. That evening, Alexandra joined Evan and Mia at their apartment for dinner. The setting couldn't have been further from downtown's gleaming towers, old hardwood floors, mismatched plates, a tiny stove that squeaked when you opened it. But to Mia, it was the safest place in the world. Alexandra sat at the small kitchen table absorbing the sensory details. She wasn't used to the soft pop of a pot simmering on the stove, the quiet hum of the refrigerator door not sealing perfectly the warmth of a home built from love instead of luxury. Mia placed a plate in front of her. "Be careful," she warned earnestly. "Dad's meatloaf is either really good or really good." Alexandra smiled, a real smile this time, not the polished one meant for investors. "I'll take my chances." They ate, they talked, and for once Alexandra wasn't analyzing anything. She was simply present. After dinner, Mia pulled out the blue notebook. "Want to see our new blueprint?" she asked. Our Alexandra echoed. Mia nodded proudly. "Dad and I are designing a safer version of the school's visitor system." And he said, she glanced at Evan, cheeks rosy. He said, "Maybe you could help, since you know a lot about security and stuff." Alexandra blinked, caught off guard. "Me?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Mia said. "You're super smart. Dad says that even when he's annoyed." Evan nearly choked. Okay, hold on," Alexandra laughed, a bright warm sound that filled the tiny kitchen. "I'd be honored," she said. And just like that, something shifted. Not dramatically, not with fireworks, but with a steady warmth that felt like the first hint of spring after a long winter. As Alexandra put on her coat to leave, Mia whispered to Evan, "Dad, do you think people can be strong and kind at the same time?" He looked at Alexandra standing in the doorway, her posture firm, her eyes soft. "Yeah," he murmured. "I think some people can." "Do you trust her?" Mia asked. Another breath. "I'm learning to," he said. And in that small answer, an even bigger truth settled. They were all learning something new. As Alexandra stepped into the hallway, she turned back with a quiet expression, something between a question and a promise. "Evan," she said softly, "when you're ready. There's something I want to tell you." He froze. Her eyes held his for a long, delicate second. And then she left, leaving behind a silence thick with possibilities. The school hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleanser and warm dust, a scent that had drifted through those corridors for decades. But this morning it carried something softer beneath it, something hopeful. Children's footsteps thudded rhythmically from classroom to classroom, laughter echoing in the distance like the warm hum of life returning after a long winter. And woven through it all was the familiar sound of a janitor's mop gliding across the floor. Except today, that sound meant something different. Evan pushed the mop bucket gently, letting the steady swish of water against tile calm his breath. For years, that sound had been a reminder of everything he'd walked away from: his career, his dreams, his ambitions. It had been the rhythm of hiding. But today, as sunlight streamed through the hallway windows, the mop's soft glide felt like something else entirely. A beginning. Down the hall, colorful banners fluttered slightly as the ventilation system kicked on. Safe Futures Lab, inspired by Mia and Evan Cole, was printed proudly across a large banner. Below it, students buzzed with excitement, lining up for the grand opening of their new innovation lab. And in a glass case at the entrance of the lab sat the little blue notebook. Not as a trophy, not as a monument, but as a reminder of where courage begins. As Evan approached the lab, the hallway lit up with the warm glow of overhead lights, and he felt the years of guilt, fear, and self-doubt loosen their grip on his shoulders. "Dad, we're starting," Mia's voice called out. She barreled down the hallway, ponytail bouncing, excitement spilling from every breath. She was holding a pair of scissors decorated with ribbons, the ceremonial kind. "You're supposed to be up front," she said, tugging him toward the growing crowd. "I thought this was your moment," he teased. "It's ours," she countered, eyes bright. The truth of that sank deep into his chest. Inside the lab, Principal Sanchez adjusted the microphone as parents, teachers, and several Hayes Dynamics engineers gathered around. The room hummed with anticipation. On the work tables, small robots blinked to life. LED circuits flickered, and code lines scrolled across donated tablets. At the front of the room, Alexandra Hayes stood waiting. She wasn't dressed like a CEO today. No power suit, no signature heels. Just a simple blouse and soft jacket, her posture relaxed, yet purposeful. She offered Evan a small smile, gentle knowing, carrying the weight of everything unspoken between them. "Ready?" she asked quietly. "No," he said honestly. She laughed softly. "Good. That means it matters." Principal Sanchez tapped the microphone. Feedback buzzed briefly, then settled. "Thank you all for joining us. Today is not just the opening of our new Safe Futures Lab. It's the celebration of a truth we learned the hard way, that our greatest strength lies in listening to one another." She gestured toward the blue notebook. "This lab exists because one child told the truth and refused to let anyone erase it." Mia squeezed her father's hand, and because her father Sanchez continued, showed us what integrity looks like. The room erupted in gentle applause. Not loud, not flashy, but warm enough to settle into the heart. Alexandra stepped forward. When the school asked for help improving their tech literacy, she began, "I expected to offer a simple sponsorship, some equipment, a workshop, maybe two." She shook her head softly. "But instead, I found something that changed everything. I found a blueprint not for a system, but for a community." She glanced at Evan, her voice softening. "I found the courage to question old assumptions, and the wisdom of someone who understood long before I did that safety is about people, not code." Evan's breath caught his throat tightening. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped to the microphone slowly, palms damp. "I don't have a prepared speech," he admitted, earning a chuckle from the room. "I was never good at these things." He looked at Mia. "I just know that this—" His voice thickened. "This is the first time in a long time I've felt like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He paused, letting that truth settle. "But whatever I am, janitor, engineer, father, I've learned that the most important work any of us do is invisible. It happens in conversations, in hallways, in classrooms, in listening when it's hard, in believing when it's easier to doubt." He breathed in deeply. "My daughter taught me that." Mia's eyes shimmered with pride, and then with a shared glance, father and daughter cut the ribbon. The room burst into gentle cheers as children streamed inside, exploring the new lab. Teachers hovered nearby, not to restrict curiosity, but to support it. Evan watched Mia dive into a group of students, explaining her blinking signal project with the confidence of someone who knew her voice mattered. As the crowd thinned, Alexandra moved beside Evan in the quieter hallway. The sunlight through the windows bathed the polished floors in golden warmth. Children's laughter drifted from the lab, bright musical, the sound of a future full of possibility. "This place is different now," she said quietly. "Yeah," Evan agreed. "It feels honest." She turned toward him, expression shifting, something vulnerable, something she rarely let anyone see. "I told you there was something I wanted to share when you were ready." He nodded, heart tightening with anticipation. "For years," she began slowly, "I've built walls to keep myself safe. I treated trust like a liability. I hired people because I could control them. I questioned anyone who challenged me, especially you." He listened quietly, the hallway echoing gently with each word. "But watching Mia stand up for your truth, watching you face what happened without bitterness." Her voice wavered softly. "It made me realize I've been protecting the wrong things." Silence stretched between them, soft, fragile, full. "Alexandra," he whispered. She took a careful step closer. "I'm working on myself," she said. "Therapy, slowing down, trying to see people the way you always did." He felt something warm unfold inside him. "And if you ever feel ready," she added, "I'd like to build something new. Not just code, not just systems." She paused, "but something human." The confession hung in the warm hallway air like a tender bridge built from both sides. Evan felt the weight of his past ease. Not erased, never erased, but integrated into a life that finally allowed room for hope. He didn't give her an answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the lab where Mia's laughter echoed full and bright like the sound of a future he never thought he'd be allowed to dream. "We fix what other people throw away," he murmured. Alexandra smiled, soft, radiant. "Including ourselves," she finished. They stood side by side, not touching but connected with trust slowly weaving itself back into their lives. A few steps away, the blue notebook rested safely behind the glass, a testament to truth, told by a child who believed wholeheartedly in her father. And somewhere deep inside the hallway, a place once heavy with shame light settled gently as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. The world is full of blueprints, systems, plans, designs, but the ones that matter most are built in quiet hallways by people who choose truth over fear, kindness over pride, and courage over silence. And sometimes, if we're lucky, those blueprints lead us home. Sometimes the most beautiful blueprints in life aren't drawn on paper. They're shaped quietly through the way we treat one another, through how we listen, how we choose kindness, and how we protect the ones who need it most. Evan, Mia, and even Alexandra remind us that healing doesn't always look like a dramatic moment. Sometimes it's a small truth spoken bravely. Sometimes it's saying, "I'm sorry." Sometimes it's finally believing that we are worthy of second chances. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own journey or of someone who once believed in you when no one else did, I invite you to share your thoughts, feelings, or stories in the comments. Has something like this ever happened in your school, your home, or your community? Your story might be the one that inspires someone listening tonight. And before you go, let me ask, where are you watching from? I love seeing our storytelling family coming together from all corners of the world. If you enjoyed this story and want more heartwarming tales of healing, love, and hope, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story. Thank you truly for spending your time here. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for being part of this journey with us. Until the next story. Take care of your heart, believe in second chances, and never underestimate the quiet power of kindness.